The space around the outer edge of the Sol system buzzed with activity. 12 massive ships hung in the black void like sleeping giants. Each ship was different from the others. Some looked like they were made of crystal and glowed with soft blue light. Others were dark metal spheres covered in strange patterns. A few seemed to be made of pure energy that shifted and danced in colors that had no names. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Crystal Dawn. He was tall and thin, with skin that looked like pale blue glass. His forearms moved slowly as he checked the reports from his crew. Through the large windows of his ship, he could see the other vessels in the fleet. Each one belonged to a different race from across the galaxy. "Status report," Kethver said in his musical voice. The words came out like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "All ships are in position, Admiral," replied his second-in-command. "The primitive world is exactly where our scouts said it would be. Third planet from their yellow star, they call it Earth?" Kethver nodded. This was routine work. Every few hundred years, the Galactic Council found another young race that had just learned to leave their home planet. Most of these new species were excited to meet older, wiser races. They usually begged to join the Council. They offered their best resources in exchange for advanced technology. It was always the same story. On the bridge of the colliery ship, thousands of insect-like creatures worked as one mind. They spoke without words, sharing thoughts through their hive connection. The Queen Mind was pleased. Another primitive race to add to their collection. The humans would make good workers once they were properly guided. These mammals show promise, the Queen Mind thought to all her children. Their cities are well organized. They have basic fusion power. They even have a few small ships in space around their world. With proper training, they could serve the hive well. The colliery ship was a dark sphere covered in holes. Through these holes, the insect workers moved in and out like bees in a hive. The ship itself was alive, grown rather than built. It pulsed with a slow heartbeat that could be felt through the metal floors near the back of the formation. The ethereal ship was harder to see. It looked like a cloud of glowing gas held together by invisible forces. Inside this cloud, beings of pure energy floated and danced. They had no solid bodies, existing as patterns of light and thought. Elder Zixthara spoke to the others through waves of energy. "I sense something unusual about this system," she said. Her voice was like the sound of distant thunder. "The quantum patterns are different than expected." The other ethereals gathered around her, their forms brightening with interest. "Different how?" asked another elder. "I am not certain yet," Zixthara replied. "But these humans may be more than they appear to be." The conversation was interrupted by a communication from Admiral Kethver's ship. "All fleet commanders, prepare for standard first contact protocols. We will begin transmission to the primitive world in 1 hour." On the bridge of the Drakmor warship, Captain Vexahan laughed. The Drakmor looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved hundreds of species. To them, this was just another easy victory. "Look at their pathetic defenses," Vexahan said to his crew. "A few orbital stations with primitive weapons. Their largest ship is smaller than our smallest fighter. This will be over before it begins." His crew hissed in agreement. The Drakmor ship was built for war. It was long and sharp, covered in weapons and armor. Spikes jutted out from its hull like the teeth of some ancient beast. The ship was painted blood red with symbols of conquest covering its sides. The other ships in the fleet were just as confident. The Aquari delegation floated in their water-filled vessel, tentacles waving in amusement. The stone-like Garan delegates sat perfectly still in their mountain ship, patient as always. The insectoid Vexpri chattered excitedly about new technology to steal. The plant-based Savani rustled their leaves in anticipation of new worlds to see. Each race had their own reasons for being here, but they all agreed on one thing. The humans would submit, just like every other primitive species before them. It was the natural order of things. The strong ruled the weak. The advanced guided the primitive. It had been this way for 10,000 years. Admiral Kethver checked the time. Soon, they would make contact with Earth. He expected the usual response: fear, panic, desperate pleas for mercy. Then would come the negotiations. The humans would offer whatever they had in exchange for protection. They would beg to join the council as junior members. They would accept whatever terms they were given. The admiral had done this 17 times before. It was always the same. The primitive species were grateful for contact with advanced civilizations. They understood that they were inferior and needed guidance. They accepted their place in the galactic order without question. Begin scanning their communications, HFY ordered. I want to know everything about their leaders, their military, their resources. The crew worked quickly. Streams of data flowed across their crystal displays. The humans had hundreds of languages, dozens of nations, and billions of people. Their technology was basic but functional. They had nuclear weapons, but nothing that could threaten a galactic fleet. Their space program was small and focused on exploration rather than war. They appear to have no unified planetary government, reported the scanning officer. Multiple power centers. This may complicate negotiations. HFY waved a dismissive hand. It matters little. Once they see our fleet, their leaders will cooperate. Fear has a way of bringing unity to divided species. On the colliery ship, the hive mind was already making plans. They would need to build worker colonies on the human world. The humans would need to be educated about their new role in the galaxy. Some would resist at first, but they would learn. They always did. The Queen Mind selected the best locations for hive cities, near large population centers where there would be plenty of workers, close to natural resources that could be harvested. Away from the more dangerous human military bases, at least until the humans accepted their new situation. Captain Vexahan was less patient than the others. Why do we waste time with talk? He demanded over the fleet communication channel. We should simply take what we want, show them our power, break their will to resist. Because, Admiral HFY replied calmly, willing servants are more valuable than broken slaves. We have learned this lesson many times over the millennia. Fear may bring quick submission, but respect and gratitude bring lasting loyalty. The Drakmor way is more honest, Vexahan growled. At least our slaves know where they stand. And how? Many of your slave worlds have rebelled over the centuries? Asked Elder Zixthara. Her energy form pulsed with amusement. We ethereals prefer the longer view. A species that joins willingly will serve faithfully for thousands of years. The debate was old and familiar. Each race had their preferred method of dealing with primitive species. But the result was always the same. The new species joined the galactic community as junior partners. They provided resources and labor. In return, they received protection and limited access to advanced technology. It was a good system. It had worked for 10,000 years. It had brought peace and order to the galaxy. The strong guided the weak. The advanced protected the primitive. Everyone had their place in the great chain of being. Time passed slowly in the cold vacuum of space. The alien fleet waited in perfect formation. Their ships hummed with power, ready for whatever response the humans might give. But none of them expected any real resistance. How could a species that had barely left their home planet challenge races that had ruled the stars for millennia? Admiral HFY looked out at the distant blue dot that was Earth. Soon, another primitive world would join the galactic community. Another species would learn their place in the greater order. Another victory for civilization over chaos. He had no way of knowing that everything he believed about the natural order of the galaxy was about to be proven wrong. He could not imagine that the primitive humans had been watching and learning, and preparing for this moment. He did not know that humanity had spent centuries getting ready for visitors exactly like him. The countdown timer on his bridge showed 30 minutes until first contact. Admiral HFY smiled, showing teeth like blue diamonds. This would be easy. It was always easy. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Admiral HFY stood at his command station as the moment arrived. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their crystalline fingers dancing over control panels that glowed with soft light. The time for first contact had come. Begin. Transmission, Kethver commanded. His voice carried the authority of 10,000 years of galactic civilization. The communications officer nodded. Across the fleet, all 12 ships turned their most powerful transmitters toward the small blue world orbiting the yellow star. The message they sent was ancient, written in the earliest days of the Galactic Council. It had been used to contact hundreds of primitive species over the millennia. Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet of this star system, the message began. We are representatives of the Galactic Council, a peaceful alliance of advanced civilizations. We come in friendship to welcome you into the greater galactic community. Please respond on this frequency and prepare to receive our diplomatic delegation. The transmission was broadcast in 17 different mathematical languages, each one designed to be understood by any species capable of space travel. It included star charts showing the positions of council worlds, basic scientific principles to prove their advanced knowledge, and instructions for establishing peaceful contact on Earth. The message was received by every radio telescope, satellite, and communication array on the planet. Within minutes, the news had spread to every government, every military command center, and every major news organization. Humanity knew they were no longer alone in the universe. Admiral Kethver leaned back in his command chair and waited. The response time would tell him a lot about human society. A quick panicked reply meant weak leadership and poor organization. A delayed response usually indicated internal debates about how to respond. Either way, the result would be the same. The humans would beg for mercy and accept whatever terms they were offered. How long until we receive their response? Asked the admiral second in command. Historical data suggests between 1 and 6 hours, Kethver replied. Primitive species need time to overcome their fear and organize a response. Some try to hide from us at first, others immediately surrender. A few attempt to negotiate, but they never have anything we actually want. On the Colliery ship, the hive mind was already making detailed plans. They had studied the human communications networks and found them surprisingly well organized. The humans had global communication systems, extensive data networks, and coordinated military structures. For a primitive species, they showed remarkable unity. These mammals may adapt well to hive protocols, the Queen Mind observed to her children. They already show group coordination on a planetary scale. With proper guidance, they could become valuable workers. The colliery workers busied themselves preparing integration protocols. They would need to establish hive nodes in major human population centers. The humans would need to learn the proper ways of thinking and working. Individual thought would have to be discouraged in favor of collective efficiency, Captain. Vexahen paced the bridge of his warship like a caged beast. The Drakmor preferred action to waiting. They had conquered their first star system within 50 years of developing spaceflight. They could not understand why other species wasted time with talking when force was so much more effective. This is foolish, Vexahen growled to his crew. We should simply land on their world and take what we want. Why give them time to prepare defenses? His weapons officer, a scarred veteran of dozens of conquests, nodded in agreement. The longer we wait, the more time they have to think of ways to resist us. Patience, came Elder Zixthara's voice over the communication channel. The ethereal's energy form pulsed with calm certainty. These humans may surprise us. I sense unusual patterns in the quantum foam around their world. Something is not as it appears? The other races dismissed her concerns. The ethereals were always seeing mysterious energy patterns and hidden meanings. They were ancient and wise, but they tended to overthink simple situations. These humans were just another primitive species stumbling into galactic society. Hours passed. The alien fleet maintained their position at the edge of the solar system, their sensors constantly scanning human activity. They watched as military forces around Earth went to high alert. They observed emergency meetings of world leaders. They recorded frantic communications between government agencies. All of this was normal, expected. Every species reacted the same way when they realized they were not alone in the universe. Fear, confusion, desperate attempts to understand what was happening. The humans were following the same pattern as hundreds of species before them, but there were also things that puzzled the alien observers. Human military units moved with unusual precision and speed. Their communication networks remained stable despite the massive shock of first contact. Most strange of all, several large installations in the outer solar system simply went dark, disappearing from sensors as if they had never existed. Are you recording these anomalies? Admiral Keffer asked his science officer. Yes, Admiral. The humans appear to have more extensive space infrastructure than our initial scans detected. Some of it is using stealth technology we do not immediately recognize. Keffer frowned. Most primitive species barely had orbital satellites when the Council found them. The humans seemed to have permanent installations throughout their star system. That was unusual, but not necessarily threatening. They probably had automated mining operations or research stations. What is the status of their response? No official communication yet, Admiral. However, we are detecting increased activity at their major communication facilities. Analysis suggests they are preparing a unified planetary response. This was also unusual. Most species either responded immediately with local governments speaking for themselves, or remained silent while trying to hide from the scary aliens. The humans seemed to be taking time to coordinate a single, planet-wide answer. On the bridge of the Aquari ship, the tentacled delegates floated in their pressurized water environment. They were peaceful traders who had joined the Council centuries ago. They found the human response interesting rather than threatening. These mammals show remarkable organization, observed Captain Reeftha, her tentacles swirling in thoughtful patterns. Most species we contact are either too frightened to respond coherently or too primitive to mount a coordinated reaction. Her navigation officer agreed. Their communication networks span the entire planet. They have achieved unprecedented global coordination for such a young species. The Aquari had extensive experience with primitive species. They often served as peaceful intermediaries when the Council made first contact. They had learned to read the signs that indicated how a species would adapt to galactic civilization. The humans were showing signs they had never seen before. Deep in the asteroid belt, automated human sensors watched the alien fleet. The Watchers had been in position for over a century, designed to look like natural space debris while monitoring for exactly this type of contact. They recorded everything. Ship configurations, energy signatures, communication frequencies, weapon systems. The data flowed through hidden relay networks to command centers on Earth and beyond. Humanity had known this day would come. They had been preparing for it since the first detection of artificial signals from deep space decades ago. Every plan, every system, every strategy had been designed with one goal in mind: survival. But the aliens did not know about the Watchers. They did not know about the preparations. They did not know that humanity had been studying galactic civilization from the shadows for generations. They believed they were dealing with a primitive species having their first contact with advanced aliens. Finally, after 18 hours of waiting, the human response came. It was not what the aliens expected. The message was brief, transmitted on the same frequency the Council had used for their initial contact. The signal was clean and powerful, suggesting sophisticated communication technology. But the content was puzzling. Message received and understood, the human response began. We appreciate your interest in establishing formal relations with Earth. Please maintain your current position while we dispatch a representative to discuss the situation. Estimated arrival time is 72 hours. Thank you for your patience. Admiral Keffer stared at the message display, reading it several times. This was not how primitive species were supposed to respond. There was no fear in the message, no begging for mercy, no desperate offers of tribute. The humans were treating this like a business meeting between equals. Did they just ask us to wait? Asked his second in command. It appears so, Keffer replied slowly. They seem to think they are in a position to dictate terms. Across the fleet, the other commanders were equally puzzled. The colliery hive mind buzzed with confusion. The humans were not following any known pattern of primitive species behavior. They were acting as if they had some kind of choice in the matter. Captain Vexahan was less confused than angry. They dare to make demands of us? We should show them the error of their thinking immediately. Patience, Elder Zixthara urged again. But even she was beginning to sense that something was fundamentally different about this contact. The quantum patterns around Earth were becoming more complex, not less. It was as if the planet itself was preparing for something. What kind of representative could they possibly send? Wondered Captain Riftha. A delegation of their planetary leaders? Some kind of diplomatic shuttle with gifts and offerings? The aliens had seen it all before. Desperate leaders in small, crude ships laden with their planet's most valuable resources. Scientists eager to trade anything for advanced technology. Military officers trying to negotiate surrender terms that would preserve some dignity for their species. But as the hours passed, something else became clear. The humans were not preparing a desperate diplomatic mission. Long-range sensors detected massive amounts of activity in the inner solar system. Power signatures that seemed too large for a primitive species. Movement patterns that suggested military rather than diplomatic preparations. Admiral, the science officer reported, we are detecting unusual energy buildups throughout the human star system. The signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Kethver studied the sensor readings. The humans were definitely preparing something, but their technology was so different from standard galactic patterns that it was hard to analyze. Their power system seemed incredibly inefficient by Council standards, but the raw output was surprisingly high. Their ships moved with crude brute force rather than elegant energy manipulation, but they were faster than expected. Are they preparing to attack us? Asked the weapons officer. With what? Kethver laughed. Our smallest escort ship has more firepower than their entire space force. If they want to commit suicide, that is their choice. But privately, the Admiral was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. Something about this situation felt different from every other first contact he had experienced. The humans were not following the script. They were not behaving like a primitive species should behave. Elder Zixthara-S energy form pulsed with growing concern. The quantum distortions around Earth were intensifying. Whatever the humans were preparing, it was something the ethereals had never encountered before. Something that bent the very fabric of space-time in ways that should not be possible for such a young species. I strongly recommend we increase our sensor sweeps, she transmitted to the fleet. These humans are not what they appear to be. But the other commanders dismissed her warnings. The ethereals always saw mysteries where none existed. These were just primitive mammals trying to act important. When their representative arrived in whatever crude ship they could cobble together, reality would assert itself. The humans would learn their place in the galactic order, just like every other species before them. The alien fleet settled in to wait, confident in their superiority and certain of the outcome. They had no way of knowing that everything they believed about primitive species was about to be challenged. They could not imagine that the crude, inefficient technology they were detecting was actually the product of a completely different approach to science and warfare. Most importantly, they had no idea that humanity's representative was not a desperate diplomat in a small shuttle. It was something else entirely. Something that would change their understanding of power, technology, and the nature of civilization itself. The countdown to humanity's response had begun. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn that the age of easy conquest was about to end. The sensors detected it first. A single contact moving outward from the inner solar system at incredible speed. At first, the alien fleet thought their instruments were malfunctioning. Nothing that large should be able to move that fast. Confirm those readings, Admiral Kethver ordered, his crystalline features showing the first signs of concern. The science officer worked frantically at his controls. running diagnostic after diagnostic. Sensors are operating normally, Admiral. The contact is real. Distance, approximately 2 billion kilometers in closing. Current velocity is 0.75 light speed. A hush fell over the bridge of the Crystal Dawn, 0.75 light. Speed was not fast by galactic standards, but it was far beyond what any primitive species should be capable of achieving. Most newly contacted civilizations barely managed 0.01 light speed in their crude first-generation ships. What is the size estimate? Kethver asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. Massive, Admiral. Initial scans suggest a length of approximately 3 kilometers. Mass readings are ... unusual. The density patterns do not match any known ship configuration in our databases. 3 kilometers. The Crystal Dawn, flagship of the Zephyrian fleet, was only 1 kilometer long. Most Council ships were built for elegance and efficiency, not size. A 3-kilometer vessel suggested either a massive cargo hauler or something designed for war on a scale the galaxy had not seen in millennia across the fleet. The other commanders were receiving similar reports. On the colliery ship, the hive mind buzzed with agitation. Their collective consciousness could not process what they were seeing. No primitive species had ever built anything so large. It violated everything they understood about technological development. This cannot be accurate, the Queen Mind declared to her children. Primitive species lacked the resources and knowledge to construct vessels of such magnitude. Our sensors must be detecting an asteroid or natural phenomenon. But the sensors told a different story. The approaching object was definitely artificial. It showed clear signs of controlled propulsion, navigation systems, and energy signatures that could only come from advanced technology. Whatever the humans had sent to meet them, it was no primitive shuttle filled with frightened diplomats. Captain Vexahan stood on the bridge of his warship, studying the tactical displays with growing unease. The Drakmor were warriors first and foremost. They understood the language of strength and power. What they were seeing made no sense according to everything they knew about primitive species. Are you certain this is a human vessel? He demanded of his sensor operator. The propulsion signature matches human fusion technology, Captain. But the scale is far beyond anything we observed during our initial surveys of their system. Vexahan's claws scraped against the metal railing as he gripped it tighter. Perhaps they found derelict technology from an ancient civilization. That would explain the size and capabilities. It was a reasonable explanation. The galaxy was littered with the remains of dead civilizations. Sometimes primitive species found advanced technology they could barely understand, let alone properly use. It usually ended badly for them, but it could temporarily give them capabilities far beyond their natural development level. On the ethereal ship, Elder Zixthara's energy form pulsed with increasingly agitated patterns. The quantum distortions she had been sensing were growing stronger as the human vessel approached. Something about its very existence was warping space-time in ways that should not be possible. This is not found technology, she announced to the fleet. The quantum signature is distinctly human. They built this themselves. Her words sent ripples of disbelief through the alien commanders. The ethereals were ancient beings who had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They could read the quantum echoes left by different technologies like fingerprints. If Elder Zixthara said the approaching vessel was genuinely human-built, then humanity was far more advanced than anyone had imagined. That is impossible. Admiral Keffer transmitted back. Our surveys clearly showed a primitive species with basic fusion power and crude chemical rockets. They have barely begun to explore their own star system. Appearances can be deceiving, Zixthara replied. Perhaps these humans have been more careful about what they allowed us to observe. The implications of her words hung in the vacuum of space like a poison cloud. If the humans had deliberately hidden their true capabilities, it meant they had known about galactic civilization long before making official contact. It meant they had been preparing for this moment while pretending to be primitive and helpless. More disturbing reports began flowing in from across the fleet. The human vessel was not alone. Long-range sensors were detecting dozens of smaller contacts throughout the solar system. Space installations that had been invisible during the initial surveys were suddenly appearing on scanners. The humans had not just hidden one ship. They had hidden an entire military infrastructure. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we are receiving multiple sensor contacts from previously undetected installations. They appear to be defense platforms, shipyards, and military bases scattered throughout the asteroid belt and outer planets." Kethver stared at the tactical display as dozens of red dots appeared across the human star system. Each one represented a facility or installation that should not exist. The humans had somehow built an extensive space-based infrastructure while appearing to be a primitive planetary civilization. "How did we miss all of this during our initial surveys?" he demanded. "The installations appear to be using advanced stealth technology, Admiral. They were designed to look like natural asteroids and space debris. Only now that they are powering up, can our sensors detect them?" Stealth technology was not unknown to the galaxy, but it was typically the province of the most advanced civilizations. The idea that a supposedly primitive species had mastered such sophisticated concealment methods was deeply unsettling. It suggested that humanity had been watching and learning about galactic technology for far longer than anyone had realized. The approaching human vessel continued to grow larger on the sensors. As it drew closer, more details became visible. The ship was not built like any vessel in the galactic databases. Instead of the flowing, organic curves favored by most council races, it was all angles and brutal efficiency. Armor plating covered every surface. Weapon emplacements bristled from its hull like the spines of some mechanical predator. "By the void," whispered the Aquari captain, her tentacles curling in. "Distress. That is not a diplomatic vessel, that is a warship." She was right. Every line of the approaching ship spoke of violence and destruction. It had been designed with one purpose in mind: to fight and win battles against superior numbers and technology. The humans had not sent diplomats to negotiate their surrender. They had sent their military to deliver a message. Captain Vexahan felt a mixture of respect and alarm as he studied the human warship. As a warrior, he could appreciate the brutal elegance of its design. As a conqueror, he recognized a potential threat when he saw one. This was not the crude, desperate gesture of a primitive species. This was the calculated move of a civilization that understood warfare on a galactic scale. "What are those energy readings?" he asked his weapons officer. "Unknown, Captain. The power output is enormous, but the technology is unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be using some form of controlled matter-antimatter reaction, but the containment methods are completely foreign to us." Matter-antimatter reactions were among the most powerful energy sources known to galactic science. Most species did not master such technology until they had been spacefaring for centuries. The fact that the humans had not only mastered it, but had apparently improved upon standard galactic techniques was deeply troubling. As the human ship drew closer, its true scale became apparent. 3 kilometers of armored death moving through space with purpose and precision. Its fusion drives burned like miniature stars, pushing the massive vessel at speeds that should have torn it apart. Yet it held together, protected by technologies the aliens could not identify or understand. "Deceleration burn detected," reported the sensor operator on the Crystal Dawn. "The human vessel is reducing velocity for final approach." What happened next defied everything the aliens thought they knew about physics and engineering. The human ship did not gradually slow down like a normal vessel. Instead, it performed a controlled deceleration that should have reduced its crew to paste against the bulkheads. The G-forces involved were beyond what any known species could survive. Yet the ship held together. Whatever technology the humans were using to protect themselves from acceleration forces was as advanced as everything else about their mysterious vessel. They had not just built a warship. They had built a warship that operated according to principles the galaxy's most advanced civilizations did not understand. Elder Zixthora S energy form flickered with patterns of deep concern. The inertial compensation systems on that vessel are beyond anything we have seen. They are manipulating gravitational fields in ways that should require technology we do not possess. Are you saying the humans are more advanced than we are? Admiral Kethver asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. I'm saying that their approach to technology is completely different from ours. Where we have focused on efficiency and elegance, they appear to have focused on raw power and brutal effectiveness. The results are impressive. The human warship finally came to a stop relative to the alien fleet. It positioned itself between the Council ships and Earth, a clear statement of protective intent. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council found themselves facing a species that was not asking for permission to exist. Incoming transmission from the human vessel, the communications officer announced. Admiral Kethver straightened in his command chair, preparing to hear the usual words of submission and negotiation. Perhaps the humans had simply wanted to impress them with their largest ship before surrendering. Many primitive species tried such gestures before accepting the inevitable. Put it through, he ordered. The main display flickered and showed the bridge of the human vessel. The commander was a female of their species, dressed in a dark uniform covered with symbols of rank and authority. Her expression was calm and professional, showing none of the fear or desperation the admiral expected to see. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the United Nations ship Indomitable, she said in clear, precise tones. Welcome to the Sol system. I appreciate your patience in waiting for our response. Before we proceed with formal relations, there are several things we need to discuss. The words hit the alien commanders like physical blows. This human was not surrendering. She was not begging for mercy. She was speaking to them as equals, as if she had some kind of authority to negotiate terms with the representatives of galactic civilization. Admiral Kethver found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. I am Admiral Kethver of the Galactic Council. You will prepare to receive our diplomatic delegation immediately. Your species will be evaluated for possible inclusion in the galactic community according to established protocols. Captain Sheen's expression did not change. I'm afraid that's not how this is going to work, Admiral. You see, we've been aware of your council and its protocols for quite some time. We've studied your expansion patterns, your subjugation techniques, and your standard operating procedures. We've decided that we prefer a different arrangement. The alien fleet fell silent. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no primitive species had ever spoken such words. No newly contacted civilization had ever dared to challenge the established order. The very concept was alien to everything they understood about how the galaxy worked. But as Captain Chen continued speaking, it became clear that humanity was about to change everything the galaxy thought it knew about power, technology, and the natural order of civilization. The age of easy conquest was about to end, and the aliens were about to learn that sometimes the prey becomes the predator when it has enough time to prepare. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking directly at the alien commanders through the communication screen. Her calm confidence seemed to fill the space between the human ship and the alien fleet. Behind her, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, showing no signs of fear or nervousness. Let me explain our situation more clearly, Chun continued, her voice steady and professional. For the past 137 years, humanity has been monitoring galactic communications. We know about your council. We know about your expansion methods. We know about what you call primitive species protocols. Admiral Kethver felt his crystalline skin grow cold. 137 years meant the humans had been watching since before they had achieved faster-than-light travel. They had been studying galactic civilization while pretending to be isolated on their single planet. That is impossible, Kethver said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Our surveys clearly showed a species confined to one world with basic technology. Captain Chen smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Your survey showed you exactly what we wanted you to see. We learned very early that the galaxy has a particular way of dealing with new species. Peaceful integration for those who submit. Conquest for those who resist. We decided we preferred neither option. She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display changed to show a star map of the local galaxy. Red lines trace the expansion. Patterns of various council species over the past several thousand years. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Every newly contacted species had either joined the council as junior members or had been conquered and enslaved. The Zirathi Collective, Chun said, pointing to one section of the map. Contacted 800 years ago. They tried to maintain their independence. Their homeworld is now a mining colony operated by the Colliery, the Bendari Federation. Contacted 300 years ago. They negotiated for equal membership in the council. They're now administrative servants managing council bureaucracy on 17 worlds. The alien commanders watched in growing horror as Chun displayed detailed knowledge of galactic history that should have been impossible for a primitive species to obtain. She knew about secret deals, hidden conquests, and political arrangements that were classified at the highest levels of council security. The Thylary Empire was the last species to seriously resist council expansion, Chun continued. That was 450 years ago. They had advanced weapons and a strong military. It took the combined council fleet 3 years to break. Their survivors are scattered across the galaxy as indentured workers. Captain Vexahan leaned forward on his command throne, his reptilian features twisted with suspicion. How do you know these things? This information is restricted to council military archives. We know because we've been listening, Chun replied. Simply, your communication networks are quite extensive. Very useful for gathering intelligence if you know how to access them properly. We've been studying your languages, your culture, your technology, and your methods for over a century. The implications hit the alien fleet like a physical blow. If the humans had been monitoring council communications for over a century, they knew everything. Military capabilities, political structures, economic systems, trade routes, even the locations of heavily guarded homeworlds. On the Colliery ship, the hive mind recoiled in shock. The Queen Mind reached out to touch the secure communication networks that connected her to other Colliery colonies. To her horror, she found traces of intrusion, subtle markers that suggested the networks had been compromised for decades. The humans had been inside their most private communications. Impossible, the Queen Mind broadcast. Our networks are quantum encrypted with bioneural locks. No outside species has the capability to penetrate them. Captain Chun turned her attention to the Colliery ship. Queen Mind designation 77 Alpha 3. Your primary colony world orbits the star you call home nest in what we designate the Kepler 442 system. Your secondary breeding facility is located on the moon of the gas giant in the Ross 128 system. Your deep space mining operations are concentrated in the asteroid fields of the Volf 359 system. The hive mind went completely silent. The information Chun had just recited was among the most closely guarded secrets of the Colliery race. Only the highest-ranking Queen Minds knew the exact locations of the breeding facilities. The coordinates were protected by layers of quantum encryption that should have been unbreakable. Elder Zixthara's energy form flickered with patterns of deep alarm. As an energy being, she was particularly sensitive to communication networks and data flows. Now that she was looking for them, she could detect the subtle signs of human intrusion throughout the galactic network infrastructure. You have been inside our systems for decades, she said, her voice carrying undertones of respect mixed with fear. How did you accomplish this without being detected? We approach the problem differently than you would expect, Chun explained. Most galactic species develop elegant, efficient systems based on energy manipulation and quantum mechanics. We took a more direct approach. We built our intrusion systems using brute force computational methods and distributed processing. Networks, she paused to let that sink in. While you were looking for sophisticated attacks using advanced physics, we were using millions of simple programs running on basic computers scattered throughout space. Quantity over quality, persistence over elegance. The alien commanders were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misjudged humanity. These were not primitive mammals stumbling into galactic society. These were patient, methodical predators who had been stalking the galaxy for over a century. Admiral Kethfer tried to regain control of the situation. Even if you have been gathering intelligence, you are still one species against the combined might of the Galactic Council. You cannot possibly challenge our authority. Captain Sheen's expression did not change. You're right that we're outnumbered. The Council controls thousands of star systems and trillions of citizens. But you're making the same mistake that every established power makes when facing a determined opponent. You're assuming that superior numbers automatically mean superior capability. The display behind her changed again, this time showing technical readouts and specifications. The alien commanders stared in disbelief at what they were seeing. Power output levels that should have been impossible. Weapon systems based on principles they did not recognize. Defensive technologies that seemed to violate known physics. This is the UNS Indomitable, Chun said with obvious pride. 3 kilometers of human engineering. She's powered by controlled matter-antimatter reactions contained within gravitational field generators of our own design. Her primary weapons are accelerated particle beams capable of achieving 97% light speed. Her defensive systems include adaptive armor that restructures itself in response to incoming attacks. Captain Vexahan studied the technical specifications with growing unease. As a warrior, he could read weapon capabilities better than most. What he was seeing suggested firepower levels that would challenge even the largest Council dreadnoughts. Your power systems are impossibly inefficient, he pointed out, trying to find some weakness in the human design. The energy waste must be enormous. You're absolutely right, Chun agreed cheerfully. Our systems waste tremendous amounts of energy compared to your elegant designs. But we compensate by generating so much power that the waste doesn't matter. Crude but effective. She gestured to the technical display. While you've spent millennia perfecting efficient energy use, we've spent centuries learning how to generate unlimited power. While you've developed elegant weapons that conserve resources, we've built weapons that don't need to conserve anything. The philosophical difference was becoming clear. Galactic civilization had evolved along paths of efficiency and conservation. They had learned to do more with less, to achieve maximum results with minimum energy expenditure. Humanity had gone the opposite direction, developing technologies that used overwhelming force to solve problems. This ship represents just one approach we've taken, Chun continued. We've also developed other technologies that might interest you, for example, our electronic warfare capabilities. The display changed to show network intrusion protocols and cyber warfare systems. The alien commanders found themselves looking at programs designed specifically to infiltrate and control galactic communication networks. Worse, they were looking at detailed maps of their own ship systems. We've been analyzing your fleet since you arrived in our system, Chun explained. Your communication networks are now completely compromised. Your navigation systems are under our observation. Your weapon systems have been mapped and categorized. Admiral Kethfer frantically checked his ship's security systems. To his horror, he found exactly what Chun had described. Human programs were running deep within the Crystal Dawn's computer networks. They were not doing anything hostile, simply observing and recording. But their presence proved that human claims were not empty boasts. You are inside our ships, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We are, Chun confirmed. We've been inside your ship since you entered our system. Your security protocols are very sophisticated, but they're designed to repel attacks using galactic technology. They weren't prepared for our approach. On the Aquari ship, Captain Reefa desperately tried to purge the human intrusion programs from her systems. But every time she eliminated one, 2 more appeared. The humans had designed their cyber warfare tools to be self-replicating and adaptive. They learned from each defense and evolved new attack methods in real time. How are you doing this? She demanded, her tentacles writhing in frustration. Distributed processing and evolutionary algorithms, Chun replied. We don't use single programs that can be detected and removed. We use millions of tiny programs that work together and evolve. Kill one, and the others learn from its death and become stronger. The alien fleet was beginning to realize that they were not just outgunned, they were outhot. Humanity had approached the problem of galactic contact from a completely different direction than any species in recorded history. Instead of trying to join galactic civilization, they had studied it, learned its weaknesses, and prepared to exploit them. What do you want? Elder Zixthara asked, her energy form pulsing with resignation. If you have been preparing for this contact for over a century, you must have specific goals. Captain Chun nodded. We do. We want the galaxy to understand that the age of easy expansion is over. No more primitive species protocols. No more automatic subjugation of newly contacted civilizations. No more assumption that advanced technology gives you the right to rule others. She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. The Galactic Council is welcome to continue operating in human space, but it will operate according to human rules. Any species that wishes to continue peaceful expansion and trade may do so. Any species that prefers the old ways of conquest and subjugation will find themselves dealing with the rest of our fleet. The rest of your fleet? Admiral Kethver asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. Captain Chun smiled again. And this time there was genuine warmth in it. Did you really think we would send our only ship to make first contact with 12 different alien civilizations? The Indomitable is our diplomatic vessel. She's here to talk. The implications hung in the vacuum of space like a sword over the alien fleet. If this massive warship was considered a diplomatic vessel, what did humanity consider a military fleet? How many ships did they have? How powerful were their dedicated war vessels? The answers were about to become terrifyingly clear. Admiral Kethver felt the weight of 10,000 years of galactic history pressing down on him. Everything the Council had built, everything they had accomplished, was suddenly in question. He looked at the human captain on his screen and made one last attempt to restore the natural order of things. You speak boldly for a single ship facing the combined might of 12 civilizations, he said, trying to inject authority into his voice. Perhaps it is time to remind you of the reality of your situation. Kethver turned to his weapons officer. Charge all primary batteries. Signal the fleet to assume attack formation. These primitives need to understand their place in the galaxy. Captain. Chun watched calmly as the alien ships began to move. Their elegant vessels shifted positions with fluid grace, weapon systems powering up in choreographed precision. The formation they took was beautiful to watch, a dance of power that had intimidated countless species across the millennia. I was hoping you would choose differently, Chun said with what sounded like genuine regret. But perhaps a demonstration is necessary, she turned to her crew. Tactical, initiate Operation Mirror. Communications, send the wake-up signal to all listening posts. The response was immediate and devastating. Every alien ship in the fleet suddenly found their weapon systems turning against them. Primary batteries that had been charging for attack swiveled around to target sister ships. Fire control systems locked onto friendly vessels instead of the human battleship. What is happening? Admiral Kethver demanded as his bridge erupted in chaos. His weapons officer frantically worked at his controls, trying to regain command of their systems. Our weapons are not responding to commands, Admiral. They appear to be under external control. Captain Chin's voice cut through the confusion. Your ship's computer systems have been compromised since you entered our solar system. Every command circuit, every control pathway, every data stream has been mapped and infiltrated. We can control your ships better than you can. On the colliery vessel, the hive mind was experiencing something it had never known before. True fear. Their entire ship was no longer under their control. The bio-neural networks that connected the ship to the Queen Mind had been severed. They were trapped inside their own vessel, prisoners of human technology they could not understand. Captain Vexahan roared in rage as his proud warship turned its main guns toward a friendly vessel. This is impossible. Our security systems are... Military grade. They cannot be breached by primitive technology. Your security systems are excellent, Chun agreed. They're designed to stop attacks from other galactic civilizations using galactic technology. Unfortunately for you, we don't use galactic technology. We use human technology, designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses in your systems. The demonstration continued for several minutes. Ships powered down and powered up at human command. Weapons targeted whatever the humans chose. Navigation systems plotted courses to destinations selected by human operators. The mighty galactic fleet had become humanity's puppet show. Elder. Zixthura's energy form flickered with patterns of defeat. As an ancient being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, she recognized a fundamental shift in galactic power when she saw one. You have changed everything, she said quietly. We had to, Chun replied. We studied your history, Elder. We learned about the Thylery Empire, the Zirithi Collective, the Bindari Federation. Every species that tried to maintain independence was eventually conquered or absorbed. We decided that pattern needed to end. The tactical display behind Chun changed to show the entire solar system. What the aliens saw made their worst fears seem optimistic. The system was not empty space with a few hidden installations. It was a fortress. Massive orbital platforms surrounded every major planet. Asteroid mining facilities that doubled as weapons manufacturing centers. Hidden shipyards in the outer system that were larger than most galactic military bases. Defense networks that spanned the entire star system like a three-dimensional web of destruction. This is what we've been building for the past century, Chun explained. Not just ships, but an entire military infrastructure designed around one principle. Never again will humanity be at the mercy of those who think they have the right to rule us. The display zoomed in on specific installations. Weapon platforms that bristled with particle accelerators and missile launchers. Shipyards where dozens of vessels larger than the Indomitable were under construction. Resource extraction facilities that could build entire fleets from the raw materials of space. Admiral Kethver stared at the images in growing horror. How many ships do you have? Currently operational? 47 capital ships, 312 heavy cruisers, over 800 destroyers and frigates, and approximately 4,000 support vessels, Chun recited from memory. Under construction? Enough to double those numbers within 2 years. The numbers hit the alien commanders like physical blows. The combined council fleet that had conquered hundreds of worlds numbered fewer than 2,000 ships total. Humanity had built a military force that could challenge the entire galactic civilization. But that's not the most important number, Chun continued. The most important number is how fast we can build new ships. Our automated shipyards can construct a capital ship in 6 months, a destroyer in 3 weeks. We don't just have a fleet. We have the industrial capacity to replace any losses and expand our numbers indefinitely. Captain Retha floated in. Her water-filled bridge, tentacles curled in despair. You have been preparing for war against the entire galaxy. We've been preparing to defend ourselves against the entire galaxy, Chun corrected. There's a difference. We don't want to conquer anyone. We don't want to rule over other species. We just want to be left alone to develop as we choose. She paused, looking directly at each alien commander in turn. But if the galaxy insists on following the old patterns of conquest and subjugation, then yes, we are prepared for war. The display changed again, showing detailed intelligence reports on every major council military installation. Fleet bases, shipyards, command centers, even the heavily defended homeworlds of the council races. The humans had mapped every strategic target in council space. We know where your fleets are based, Chun said matter-of-factly. We know your supply lines, your communication networks, your political leadership. We've been studying you for over a century, remember? We know exactly how to hurt you if we need to. Elder Zixthura pulsed with resignation. You could destroy. We could, Chun agreed, but we don't want to. Destruction is wasteful. We'd much rather have peaceful neighbors than conquered enemies. She gestured to her crew, and the alien ship suddenly found their weapon systems returning to their control. The demonstration was over, but its message was clear. Humanity could take control of Council ships whenever they chose. They could disable entire fleets without firing a shot. So here's what's going to happen, Chan announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. The Galactic Council will continue to exist. Species that want to join will still be welcome. Trade will continue. Exploration will continue. Scientific cooperation will continue. She leaned forward, her expression becoming deadly serious. But there will be no more primitive species protocols. No more automatic subjugation of newly contacted civilizations. No more assumption that advanced technology gives you the right to rule others. Any species that violates these new rules will find themselves facing the full military might of humanity. Admiral Keffer found his voice after a long moment of silence. And if we refuse? If we choose to maintain the old ways? Captain Chin's smile was cold as the vacuum of space. Then you'll discover that humanity has spent the last century developing weapons, specifically designed to destroy galactic civilization. We've studied your weaknesses, Admiral. We know exactly how to bring down your empire. The display behind her showed new images, weapon systems unlike anything in the galactic databases. Planet crackers that could shatter entire worlds. Star killers that could destabilize solar systems. Weapons that use the galaxy's own infrastructure against itself. We call it the Prometheus Protocol, Chan explained. If humanity is threatened with extinction, we will take the entire galactic civilization. Down with us. We've had over a century to prepare for this possibility. We are very thorough when we commit to something. The alien fleet fell silent. The magnitude of what they were facing finally became clear. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered or absorbed. They were a fundamental challenge to everything the galaxy had been built on. They had the power to destroy galactic civilization and the will to use it if necessary, but they were also offering an alternative. A new way of doing things that didn't require conquest and subjugation. A galaxy where species could develop according to their own choices rather than having development dictated by their conquerors. What do you want from us? Elder Zixthara asked finally. We want you to go home, Chun said simply. We want you to tell your governments and your councils and your queens and your emperors that the galaxy has changed. The age of easy conquest is over. From now on, every species gets to choose its own path. She stood up from her command chair, towering over the alien commanders even through the communication screen. Humanity will be watching. We will be listening. We will be ready. Any species that wants to live in peace will find us to be valuable allies. Any species that wants to continue the old ways of conquest will find us to be their worst nightmare. The communication ended, leaving the alien fleet alone with their thoughts and their fear. The universe they had known for 10,000 years was gone. In its place was something new and terrifying and full of possibilities they had never imagined. Admiral Kethver looked out at the human battleship that still hung between his fleet and Earth. Behind it, he could see the distant lights of the installations and platforms that humanity had built in secret. An entire civilization that had prepared for this moment while pretending to be primitive and helpless. Set course for home, he ordered quietly. All ships, prepare for immediate departure. As the alien fleet began to move away from Earth, each commander knew they carried a message that would change the galaxy forever. The humans had arrived, and everything was different now. The strong could no longer simply take what they wanted from the weak. The advanced could no longer automatically rule the primitive. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy would have to learn a new way of doing things. And if they refused to learn, humanity would be waiting to teach them the hard way. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of human determination had begun.
Captain Sarah Chin stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Defiant Dawn, watching the blue and brown planet grow larger on the main screen. Kepler 442c looked peaceful from space, but the readings from their sensors told a different story. The planet should have been quiet, with only a small mining operation according to the galactic records. Instead, their instruments showed massive industrial activity and thousands of life signs concentrated in specific areas. Sarah had been exploring space for 15 years. She knew what normal mining operations looked like, and this was not normal. The energy signatures were too big, the heat patterns too concentrated, and there were far too many ships coming and going from the planet's surface. Lieutenant Kim, scan those facilities again, Sarah ordered. Something's not right here. Lieutenant David Kim worked at his console, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. The young officer had joined her crew 6 months ago, fresh from the academy on Earth. He was eager and smart, but he had never seen anything like what their sensors were picking up. Captain, I'm reading over 50,000 life signs in what appears to be enclosed compounds, Kim reported. The structures look like, they look like prison camps, ma'am. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The Terran Federation had spread across 73 star systems in the past 2 centuries, and they had only one law that applied everywhere humans went. No sentient being could be enslaved, trafficked, or held against their will. It was the one rule that every human colony, every human ship, and every human citizen was bound to follow and protect. The law had come from humanity's own dark history. Earth had seen enough slavery, enough suffering, enough people treated like property. When humans finally reached the stars, they had made a promise. Never again would they allow any thinking being to be bought, sold, or owned by another. Take us into a closer orbit, Sarah commanded. But keep us hidden behind that moon. I want detailed scans of those facilities. The Defiant Dawn moved silently through space, using the small moon's gravity to mask their approach. Sarah's crew worked quietly, gathering data and images from the planet below. What they found made Sarah's blood run cold. The compounds were definitely prison camps. Thousands of beings from dozens of different species were being held in terrible conditions. The buildings were overcrowded, the sanitation was poor, and armed guards patrolled the perimeters. Worse, the scans showed that many of the prisoners were humans. Captain, Kim said quietly, I'm picking up work details being moved from the camps to the mining sites. They're chained together, ma'am. This is definitely slavery. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. In all her years of exploration, she had never encountered anything like this. She had heard stories, of course. There were always rumors of illegal slave operations in the outer systems, far from the major trade routes and government patrols. But to find it happening on this scale with humans among the victims was shocking. Who's running this operation? Sarah asked. Her communications officer, Ensign Maria Santos, checked the ship registries and planetary records. According to the official files, this is a Zephyrian syndicate mining operation. They have legal permits from the local sector government. Sarah knew about the Zephyrians. They were a powerful alien species that controlled dozens of star systems and had huge influence in galactic politics. They were known for their business skills and their ability to make deals with anyone. What she was seeing now explained how they had become so wealthy so quickly. Ma'am, we need to contact Terran Command immediately, Lieutenant Kim said. This is a clear violation of human law. Sarah nodded, but before she could give the order, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. 3 large Zephyrian warships had appeared from behind the planet, moving fast toward their position. They've detected us, Santos reported. They're demanding we leave the system immediately. Open a channel, Sarah ordered. The main screen showed a Zephyrian officer. The alien's scaled face showed no emotion as it spoke in perfect English. Human vessel, you are in restricted space. Depart immediately or face the consequences. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation vessel Defiant Dawn, Sarah replied firmly. We have detected illegal slavery operations on the planet below. This is a violation of human law and we demand immediate access to investigate. The Zephyrian's eyes narrowed. You have no authority here, human. This is Zephyrian space operating under legal permits. Leave now. Those are human citizens being held against their will, Sarah said, her voice getting harder. The Terran Federation has the right to protect its people anywhere in the galaxy. You have 30 seconds to change course, the Zephyrian replied. After that, we will consider you hostile. Sarah looked at her crew. The Defiant Dawn was an exploration ship, not a warship. They had defensive shields and some weapons, but nothing that could match 3 Zephyrian battlecruisers. But she also knew her duty. The law was clear and the evidence was overwhelming. Record everything we found, Sarah ordered. Send it to our probe and launch it toward the nearest Terran outpost. Make sure the data gets home. Captain, they're powering weapons, Kim warned. Do it now, Sarah said. The small probe launched from the ship, accelerating quickly toward the edge of the system. It would take weeks to reach the nearest human outpost, but the data would eventually get to Earth. The evidence of what was happening here would not die with them. Human ship. You have violated our warning, the Zephyrian said. Prepare to be destroyed. The 3 warships opened fire. The Defiant Dawn's shields flared as energy beams struck them. Sarah's ship shook violently as the defensive system struggled against the massive firepower. Return fire, Sarah ordered, even though she knew it was hopeless. The exploration ship's small weapons did little damage to the heavily armored Zephyrian vessels. The enemy ships spread out, surrounding the human vessel and continuing their attack. The Defiant Dawn's shields began to fail. Hull breach on Deck 3, Kim reported. We're losing life support in sections 4 through 7. Emergency power to shields, Sarah commanded, but she knew they only had minutes left. The ship shook again as another volley hit them. Sparks flew from damaged consoles and the lights flickered. Sarah could smell smoke in the air and hear the sound of metal being torn apart. Captain, the engines are failing, Santos called out. We're dead in space. The Zephyrian ships moved closer, their weapons still trained on the crippled human vessel. The lead ship sent another message. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your immediate destruction. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. They were young, dedicated people who had joined the exploration service to see the galaxy and help make it a better place. Now they were about to become prisoners, or worse, because they had tried to do the right thing. All hands, this is the captain, Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. Prepare for boarding. Destroy all sensitive data and equipment. Remember your training, remember your duty, and remember that the truth about what we found here must reach Earth. The Zephyrian boarding parties cut through the hull with energy torches. Armed soldiers in battle armor moved through the ship, rounding up the crew. Sarah and her officers were taken to the bridge and forced to their knees. The Zephyrian commander who entered the bridge was different from the one on the screen. This one was older, with more scars and a harder look in his eyes. He examined the destroyed equipment and the empty data cores with obvious displeasure. Where is your data on our operations? He demanded. What operations? Sarah replied. We detected some unusual energy readings and came to investigate. We found nothing of interest. The commander struck her across the face with the back of his hand. The blow was hard enough to split her lip and make her ears ring. Do not lie to me, human. We know you scanned our facilities. Where is the data? There is no data, Sarah said, spitting blood. You destroyed our computers when you attacked us. The commander studied her for a long moment, then gestured to his soldiers. Take them to the planet. Put them with the other workers. Perhaps sometime in the camps will make them more cooperative. Sarah and her crew were loaded onto a transport ship and taken down to the planet's surface. The journey gave her time to see more of the operation from above. The scale was incredible. There were dozens of camps, hundreds of mining sites, and thousands of ships moving back and forth between the planet and space. The transport landed at one of the larger camps, and Sarah got her first close look at the horror the Zephyrians had created. The buildings were crude metal structures, overcrowded and poorly maintained. Armed guards walked the perimeters, and high-energy fences kept the prisoners inside. The camp commander, another Zephyrian, looked at the new arrivals with interest. Ah, the troublesome humans. I have special accommodations for you. Sarah and her crew were separated from each other and thrown into different sections of the camp. Sarah found herself in a barracks building with 50 other prisoners from a dozen different species. The conditions were terrible. The building was hot, overcrowded, and dirty. There was barely enough food and water for everyone, and medical care was non-existent. But what shocked Sarah the most was meeting the other humans in the camp. There were hundreds of them, taken from colonies and ships across human space. Some had been prisoners for years, working in the mines and factories while their families back home believed they were dead or missing. An older human man named Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared name, had been in the camp for 3 years. He had been the captain of a merchant vessel that had been attacked and captured while carrying supplies to a frontier colony. They've been doing this for decades, Robert told Sarah quietly as they sat in the barracks after their first day of forced labor in the mines. Taking people from the outer colonies where no one will notice right away. The Zephyrians sell us to other species because humans can work in almost any environment. How many camps are there? Sarah asked. On this planet alone? Maybe 20, but they have operations across dozens of systems, thousands of camps, millions of prisoners. It's the biggest slave operation in the galaxy, and it's been growing every year. Sarah felt sick. The law that humanity held most sacred was being violated on a massive scale, and no one back home even knew it was happening. The Zephyrians had been careful, taking people from places where they wouldn't be missed immediately, bribing local officials to look the other way, and using their political influence to keep major governments from investigating. We have to get word out, Sarah said. Earth has to know what's happening here. Robert shook his head sadly. How? We're trapped here, and even if we could escape, the Zephyrians own the local governments. No one will listen to escaped prisoners with no proof. But Sarah refused to give up hope. Somewhere out there, her probe was still traveling toward human space, carrying the evidence of what the Zephyrians were doing. The data would reach Earth eventually, and when it did, the response would be swift and terrible. The Terran Federation had only one law, but it was a law written in the blood and suffering of Earth's history. Humanity had learned the hard way what happened when people were treated as property, and they had sworn never to let it happen again. The Zephyrians had broken that law. They had taken human citizens, enslaved them, and sold them like animals. They had built an empire on the suffering of millions of sentient beings, including Sarah's own people. As Sarah lay on the hard floor of the barracks, listening to the quiet sobs of prisoners around her, she made a promise. Somehow, some way, the truth would reach Earth. And when it did, the Zephyrians would learn that there was a price to pay for breaking humanity's sacred law. The price would be paid in blood. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood in his office at Terra Prime, staring at the report on his desk. The probe from the Defiant Dawn had finally reached human space after 6 weeks of travel. The data it carried was horrifying beyond belief. Marcus had served in the Terran Navy for 35 years. He had fought pirates, explored unknown systems, and helped establish colonies on distant worlds. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was reading now. The evidence was overwhelming. Detailed scans, photographs, and sensor readings showed massive slave operations across multiple star systems. Hundreds of thousands of beings from dozens of species were being held in brutal conditions, forced to work in mines and factories, and among them were thousands of humans. Sir, his aide, Commander Lisa Park, entered the office. We've received more information from our intelligence networks. 3 more ships have gone missing in the outer systems, all in areas where we now know the Zephyrians operate. Marcus nodded grimly. The pattern was becoming clear. For years, the Zephyrians had been systematically capturing ships and raiding colonies in remote areas. They had been careful to target places where people wouldn't be missed immediately, where local authorities could be bribed or intimidated into silence. What's the status of diplomatic contact? Marcus asked. Ambassador Johnson made formal inquiries yesterday, Park replied. The Zephyrian government denies any knowledge of slave operations. They claim the Defiant Dawn was destroyed for violating their territorial boundaries and refusing to leave when ordered. Marcus felt his anger rising. The Zephyrians weren't just operating slave camps. They were lying about it, using their diplomatic status to cover up their crimes. They thought they could hide behind legal technicalities and political influence. Get me a secure line to Admiral Chen at Fleet Command, Marcus ordered. 5 minutes later, Marcus was speaking directly to the head of the Terran Navy. Admiral Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Captain Sarah Chen, listened carefully as Marcus briefed her on the situation. The evidence is undeniable, Marcus concluded. The Zephyrians have been operating the largest slave network in known space. They've captured thousands of our people and are holding them in conditions that violate every principle of civilized behavior. I understand your anger, Marcus, Admiral Chen replied. But we have to be careful here. The Zephyrian Syndicate is one of the most powerful political entities in this sector. They have influence with the Galactic Trade Council, the Interspecies Defense Alliance, and dozens of other organizations. If we move against them without absolute proof, We have absolute proof, Marcus interrupted. The data from the Defiant Dawn is completely reliable. Captain Sarah Chen and her crew died trying to get this information to us. The Zephyrians are claiming the data is fake, Admiral Chen said. They say it's part of a human conspiracy to damage their reputation and steal their mining rights. Some of the other major powers are starting to believe them. Marcus stared at the wall of his office where portraits of famous naval officers looked down at him. These were men and women who had fought to protect human dignity and freedom across the galaxy. They would never have tolerated what was happening now. "What are our options?" Marcus asked. "The Senate is meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation," Admiral Chen replied. "But the political advisors are recommending economic sanctions rather than military action. They're afraid that a war with the Zephyrians could destabilize the entire sector." Marcus felt his heart sink. Economic sanctions would do nothing to help the people suffering in those camps right now. While politicians argued and diplomats made speeches, thousands of humans would continue to suffer as slaves. The next day, Marcus sat in the Senate gallery and watched as Earth's leaders debated the fate of their captured citizens. Senator Williams from the Colonial Committee stood at the podium, making the case for a military response. "The evidence is clear," Senator Williams declared. "Our people are being held as slaves in violation of our most fundamental law. We have a moral obligation to rescue them and punish those responsible." But Senator Harrison from the Trade Committee disagreed. Military action against the Zephyrian Syndicate would be an act of war, he argued. It could lead to a conflict that spreads across dozens of star systems. The economic damage alone could set back human expansion by generations. Other senators voiced their concerns. The Zephyrians had powerful allies. Their trade network supplied critical resources to human colonies. A war could mean shortages of food, medicine, and industrial materials for millions of people. Marcus watched the debate with growing disgust. These politicians were talking about trade routes and economic stability, while human beings were being tortured and worked to death in alien slave camps. They were putting money ahead of human lives, politics ahead of principle. The final vote was 127 to 98 in favor of economic sanctions. No military action would be taken. Instead, Earth would impose trade restrictions and demand the return of captured humans through diplomatic channels. Marcus left the Senate building that night knowing that the sanctions would be useless. The Zephyrians would ignore them, just as they had ignored previous diplomatic protests. The slave operations would continue, and more humans would suffer and die while politicians made speeches about the importance of peaceful solutions. That night, Marcus sat in his apartment and wrote his resignation letter. After 35 years of service, he could no longer serve a government that would abandon its own people for the sake of political convenience. But before he submitted his resignation, Marcus sent out a coded message through secure military channels. The message went to trusted officers throughout the fleet, to colony defense forces, to merchant marine captains, and to anyone else who might be willing to act when their government would not. The message was simple. The law has been broken. Justice will be served. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Marcus was receiving replies from ship captains, colonial militias, corporate security forces, and even retired military officers. They all wanted to know one thing. What could they do to help? Marcus realized that he wasn't alone. Across human space, there were thousands of people who shared his anger and his determination to act. These were people who understood that some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the political consequences. 3 days later, Marcus officially resigned from the Terran Navy. His resignation letter was brief and to the point. "I can no longer serve a government that values political convenience over human freedom. The sacred law of our people has been broken, and if our leaders will not act, then citizens must." The resignation caused a sensation in the media. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez was a war hero, a respected leader who had served with distinction for decades. His public criticism of the Senate's decision to pursue sanctions instead of military action sparked protests across dozens of human worlds. But Marcus wasn't interested in protests or politics. He was interested in action. Using his personal savings and donations from supporters, he purchased a small fleet of civilian ships and began recruiting volunteers. He called his organization the Liberators, and their mission was simple: find and free every human being held in slavery anywhere in the galaxy. The Liberators operated outside official government channels, but they had widespread support among human civilians. Ship captains volunteered their vessels. Colonial militias provided weapons and supplies. Scientists and intelligence officers shared information about Zephyrian operations. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist whose daughter had disappeared during a research expedition in Zephyrian space, became the Liberator's chief intelligence coordinator. She used her contacts in the scientific community to gather information about slave operations throughout the galaxy. What Dr. Vasquez discovered was even worse than what the Defiant Dawn had found. The Zephyrian slave network operated across more than 50 star systems. They had captured people from hundreds of different species, but humans were their preferred targets because of their adaptability and intelligence. They've been planning this for decades, Dr. Vasquez reported to Marcus during one of their secret meetings. The slave operation isn't just a profitable side business for them. It's the foundation of their entire economy. Everything they've built, all their wealth and power, comes from the suffering of enslaved beings. The Liberators began with small operations. Single ships would infiltrate Zephyrian space, locate slave transport vessels, and free the prisoners. These early missions were dangerous and difficult, but they were successful. Hundreds of people were rescued and brought back to human space, but each successful mission revealed new horrors. The slaves rescued by the Liberators told stories of torture, medical experiments, and deliberate starvation. Children were separated from their parents and sold to different buyers. Sick and injured slaves were simply left to die. Captain Sarah Chen, who had managed to escape from the camp on Kepler 442c along with several other prisoners, joined the Liberators and became one of their most effective field commanders. Her first-hand knowledge of Zephyrian operations made her invaluable in planning rescue missions. They think they're untouchable, Sarah told Marcus after her first successful raid. The Zephyrians believe that political pressure will protect them from any real consequences. They don't understand what they've unleashed, but the Zephyrians were learning. As Liberator raids became more frequent and successful, the aliens began to respond with increasing brutality. For every slave ship that was liberated, they executed dozens of prisoners in retaliation. Guards at the slave camps became more violent, and escape attempts were punished with death. The situation reached a new level of horror when the Zephyrians attacked the human agricultural colony of New Kansas. The planet had been completely neutral in the conflict, with no connection to the Liberators. But the Zephyrians invaded anyway, capturing the entire population of 2.3 million people. The message from the Zephyrian leadership was broadcast across human space. For every slave you free, we will take 10 humans in return. Continue your illegal activities, and we will reduce every human colony to ashes. The attack on New Kansas finally broke the political deadlock on Earth. Public outrage was so intense that the Senate had no choice but to act. By a vote of 201 to 24, they declared the Zephyrian Syndicate a hostile entity and authorized unlimited military action. Admiral Rodriguez was recalled from his exile and given command of the largest naval force in human history. The official Terran Navy would join with the Liberator fleet to form a combined armada of over 3,000 ships. As Marcus stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the dreadnought Righteous Fury, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had started with a simple principle. No sentient being should be enslaved. That principle had cost him his career, his comfortable life, and nearly everything he owned. But it had also given him something far more valuable: the knowledge that he was fighting for something truly important. The coming war would be brutal and costly. Many good people would die. But they would die fighting to protect the most fundamental right of all thinking beings, the right to be free. The Zephyrians had broken humanity's sacred law. They had enslaved humans, tortured them, and threatened to destroy entire colonies. They had built an empire on suffering and called it civilization. Now they would learn that there were some lines that should never be crossed. They would learn that humanity, when finally roused to anger, was capable of terrible vengeance. The war was about to begin, and it would not end until every chain was broken and every slave was free. The price would be paid in blood, but justice would be served. The message from Admiral Rodriguez spread through human space like wildfire. Within days, merchant captains were altering their shipping routes to carry supplies to Liberator bases. Colonial militias were volunteering entire units for rescue operations. Corporate security forces were donating ships and weapons. Even pirates and smugglers were offering their services to the cause. Captain Jake Morrison had been smuggling goods through the outer systems for 15 years. He knew every hidden route, every quiet port, and every corrupt official who could be bought for the right price. When he received Rodriguez's coded message, he didn't hesitate. His ship, the Swift Current, became part of the growing Liberator fleet. "This is bigger than anything I've ever seen," Jake told his crew as they prepared for their first mission. "Half the merchants in the sector are working with us now. The other half are too scared of the Zephyrians to get involved." The Liberators had evolved from a small group of volunteers into something resembling a professional military force. They had their own intelligence network, their own supply lines, and their own command structure. Dr. Elena Vasquez had become their chief strategist, using her scientific contacts throughout the galaxy to map the entire slave trade network. The scope of what Dr. Vasquez discovered was staggering. The Zephyrian slave operation wasn't just limited to a few star systems. It was a galactic network that touched nearly every inhabited region of space. There were supply routes that connected dozens of systems, processing centers where slaves were sorted and sold, and markets where buyers came from across the galaxy to purchase human beings. "Look at this," Dr. Vasquez said, showing Marcus a holographic map of the galaxy during one of their planning sessions. Red lines showed slave transport routes, while red dots marked known camps and processing centers. The map was covered in red. "They've been building this network for over 50 years. It's not just an economic system for them. It's the foundation of their entire civilization." Marcus studied the map with growing anger. Every red dot represented thousands of suffering beings. Every red line represented ships full of people being transported like cargo to unknown fates. The Zephyrians hadn't just violated human law. They had built an entire society based on the suffering of others. "What about their buyers?" Marcus asked. "Who's purchasing these slaves?" "That's the really disturbing part," Dr. Vasquez replied. "It's not just one or two species. We've identified buyers from at least 40 different civilizations. Some are using slaves for manual labor, others for domestic service, and some—" She paused, her face showing disgust. "Some are buying humans for entertainment purposes." Marcus felt his stomach turn. The idea of human beings being purchased for the amusement of alien creatures was almost too horrible to contemplate. But it explained why the Zephyrians had been so successful for so long. They weren't just selling to a few criminal organizations. They were supplying a galactic market for slave labor. Captain Sarah Chen entered the briefing room, still bearing the scars from her time in the Zephyrian camps. She had become one of the Liberators' most effective field commanders, leading dozens of successful rescue missions. "We need to talk about tactics," Sarah said, taking a seat at the conference table. "The Zephyrians are getting smarter. They're increasing security on their transport ships and moving operations to more heavily defended systems." "What are you recommending?" Marcus asked. "We need to hit them harder and faster," Sarah replied. "Instead of targeting individual ships, we need to attack their infrastructure. Take out their processing centers, destroy their supply depots, and eliminate their command posts." Dr. Vasquez nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. Our intelligence shows that they have 3 major command centers that coordinate operations across entire sectors. If we could eliminate those centers, it would cripple their ability to move slaves efficiently." Marcus considered their recommendations. The Liberators had been successful with small-scale raids, but they hadn't yet attempted anything as ambitious as attacking major Zephyrian installations. Such operations would require more ships, more weapons, and more coordination than they had ever attempted before. "What kind of resistance would we face?" Marcus asked. "Heavy," Sarah admitted. "These aren't lightly defended transport ships. The command centers are protected by battle stations, minefields, and patrol fleets. We'd be looking at significant casualties. But the intelligence value would be enormous," Dr. Vasquez added. "Each command center contains detailed records of every operation in their sector. We'd finally have complete information about the scope of their network." Marcus made his decision. "Plan the operations. We'll hit all 3 command centers simultaneously. If we're going to escalate this conflict, we need to make sure the escalation serves our purposes." The planning took 3 weeks. The Liberators had grown to include over 400 ships of various sizes, from small scout vessels to converted cargo haulers carrying heavy weapons. The fleet was divided into 3 task forces, each assigned to attack one of the Zephyrian command centers. Marcus would personally lead the attack on the primary command center in the Arcturus system. Sarah would command the assault on the secondary center in the Vega system. Captain Morrison would lead the 3rd attack in the distant Proxima system. The attacks were scheduled to occur simultaneously, preventing the Zephyrians from warning each other or sending reinforcements. Each task force would have to fight its way through heavy defenses, capture or destroy the command centers, and extract as much intelligence as possible before withdrawing. 3 days before the attacks were scheduled to begin, Marcus received an unexpected message. It came through official diplomatic channels from the Galactic Trade Council, the organization that regulated commerce between different species. Admiral Rodriguez, the message began, "The Galactic Trade Council is deeply concerned about the increasing violence in the outer systems. We urge you to cease your illegal activities immediately and return to Earth for negotiations. The Zephyrian Syndicate has filed formal complaints about your attacks on their commercial vessels." Marcus deleted the message without finishing it. The Galactic Trade Council had known about the slave operations for years and had done nothing to stop them. Their concern about violence was meaningless when that violence was the only thing that had freed thousands of enslaved beings. The attacks began exactly on schedule. Marcus's task force dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Arcturus system, immediately coming under fire from Zephyrian patrol ships. The battle was fierce and immediate. Liberator ships spread out in attack formation, while Zephyrian reinforcements rushed to defend their command center. All ships, focus fire on the battle station protecting the command center. Marcus ordered over the tactical communications channel. "We need to clear a path for the assault teams." The space around the command center became a maze of explosions and energy beams. Liberator ships darted between larger Zephyrian vessels, using their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. But the Zephyrians fought back with determination, knowing that the loss of their command center would cripple operations across an entire sector. The battle lasted for 6 hours. When it was over, the Zephyrian defenses had been destroyed and the command center was in Liberator hands. The intelligence recovered from the center's computers was beyond anything they had hoped for. Complete records of slave operations across 12 star systems, detailed buyer lists, and financial records showing exactly how much money the Zephyrians had made from human suffering. The other 2 attacks were equally successful. Sarah's force captured the Vega command center after a brutal 4-hour battle, while Morrison's team destroyed the Proxima Center and escaped with copies of all the computer files. But the intelligence they recovered brought both good news and bad news. The good news was that they now had a complete picture of the Zephyrian slave network. They knew where every major facility was located, how the transport routes worked, and who was buying slaves from different species. The bad news was that the network was even larger than they had imagined. The 3 command centers had been coordinating operations involving over 2 million enslaved beings across 47 star systems. The Zephyrians weren't just running a large criminal organization. They were operating the biggest slave empire in galactic history. "This changes everything," Dr. Vasquez said as she reviewed the captured data. "We're not fighting a criminal syndicate. We're fighting an entire civilization that has built itself on slavery." The captured intelligence also revealed something else. The Zephyrians were planning a massive expansion of their operations. They had been preparing to launch coordinated raids against dozens of human colonies, planning to capture millions more people to feed their growing network of buyers. Marcus realized that the Liberators had been fighting a defensive war without knowing it. While they had been conducting small-scale rescue operations, the Zephyrians had been preparing for a massive offensive that would have devastated human space. "We can't wait for them to make their move," Marcus told his senior commanders during an emergency meeting. "We have to hit them first, and we have to hit them hard enough to cripple their entire operation." The plan that emerged from that meeting was audacious beyond anything the Liberators had attempted before. They would launch simultaneous attacks on every major Zephyrian facility, identified in the captured intelligence. Supply depots, processing centers, transport hubs, and slave camps across dozens of star systems would all be hit at the same time. It would require coordinating over 1,000 ships and tens of thousands of personnel. The logistics alone were staggering, but Marcus knew they had no choice. The Zephyrians had proven that they couldn't be reasoned with or deterred by limited action. The only way to stop them was to destroy their ability to operate entirely. As word of the planned operation spread through human space, the response was overwhelming. Colony governments offered the use of their defense fleets. Merchant captains volunteered their ships for supply runs. Industrial corporations donated weapons, armor, and medical supplies. But the Zephyrians weren't passive. As reports of liberator activities reached their leadership, they began to respond with escalating brutality. For every facility the liberators attacked, the Zephyrians executed dozens of prisoners in retaliation. Guards at slave camps became more violent and conditions for the prisoners deteriorated rapidly. The breaking point came when the Zephyrians attacked New Kansas. The agricultural colony had been completely neutral in the conflict with no connection to the liberators. Its 2.5 million inhabitants were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and their families. They had no military forces and posed no threat to anyone. The Zephyrian attack was swift and brutal. Military transports descended on the colony's cities and towns, capturing everyone they could find. Resistance was minimal and quickly crushed. Within hours, the entire population of New Kansas had been loaded onto slave ships and transported to processing centers throughout Zephyrian space. The message that accompanied the attack was broadcast across human space. For every slave you free, we will take 10 humans in return. Continue your illegal activities, and we will reduce every human colony to ashes. The attack on New Kansas finally galvanized the Earth government. Public outrage was so intense that even the most cautious politicians couldn't ignore it. The Senate met in emergency session and by an overwhelming vote, declared the Zephyrian Syndicate a hostile entity and authorized unlimited military action. Admiral Rodriguez was recalled from his exile and given command of the largest fleet in human history. The official Terran Navy would join with the Liberator forces to create an armada of over 3,000 ships. The mission was simple: destroy the Zephyrian slave network completely and rescue every human being held in captivity. As Marcus stood on the bridge of his new flagship, he thought about how far they had come. What had started as a small group of volunteers had grown into the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. The Underground Railroad had become a war machine, and that machine was about to be unleashed with the full backing of Earth's government. The Zephyrians had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that political pressure and economic influence would protect them from any serious consequences. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for righteous anger, and had pushed that anger past the breaking point. Now they would face the full wrath of an entire species that had been roused to fury. The war was about to begin, and it would not end until every chain was broken and every slave was free. The combined human fleet gathered at staging areas throughout the frontier systems. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Righteous Fury, watching as ships continued to arrive from across human space. The sight was both inspiring and sobering. Over 3,000 vessels of every size and type, from massive battleships to converted cargo haulers, all united by a single purpose. Captain Sarah Chen approached, carrying the final tactical briefing. Her face was grim as she handed Marcus the datapad containing their target assignments. The intelligence teams have confirmed the locations of 847 Zephyrian facilities across 47 star systems, she reported. Slave camps, processing centers, transport hubs, command posts, and military installations. We'll be hitting all of them simultaneously. Marcus reviewed the operational plan one more time. Operation Broken Chains was the largest military operation in human history. Every major fleet in the Terran Navy was involved, supported by colonial defense forces, corporate security fleets, and the volunteer ships of the original liberators. What's our estimate for rescued prisoners? Marcus asked. Conservatively, over 8 million beings from dozens of species, Sarah replied. But Marcus, the resistance is going to be fierce. The Zephyrians have had time to prepare since New Kansas. They know we're coming. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined them on the bridge, carrying her own set of reports. The xenobiologist had become the operation's chief intelligence coordinator, and her network of contacts had provided crucial information about Zephyrian defenses. The latest intelligence suggests they've been moving their most valuable slaves to heavily fortified facilities, Dr. Vasquez reported. They're using our own people as human shields, hoping we'll hesitate to attack installations where large numbers of humans are being held. Marcus felt his anger rise. Even now, facing the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, the Zephyrians were still thinking like slavers. They couldn't conceive of an enemy that would risk everything to save people they had never met. They still don't understand what they're facing, Marcus said quietly. They think we're like them, that we'll sacrifice principle for convenience. They're about to learn otherwise. The first phase of Operation Broken Chains began at 0800 hours Galactic Standard Time. Across 47 star systems, human ships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately engaged Zephyrian defenses. The attacks were coordinated to prevent any facility from warning the others, but even so, the fighting was intense from the very beginning. Marcus led the primary assault force against the Zephyrian stronghold in the Kepler system, the same system where Captain Sarah Chen had first discovered the slave operations months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were returning to where it all began, but this time they came not as explorers but as liberators backed by the full might of human civilization. The battle for Kepler 4042c was brutal. The planet was now ringed with orbital defense platforms and protected by a fleet of Zephyrian warships. The aliens had learned from previous encounters and had prepared formidable defenses. All ships, spread out and engage at maximum range, Marcus commanded. Priority targets are the orbital platforms. We need to clear a path for the landing forces. The space around the planet erupted in explosions and energy beams. Human ships darted between the massive Zephyrian defense platforms, their smaller size and superior maneuverability, allowing them to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. But the defenders fought back with desperate determination, knowing that the loss of this system would signal the beginning of the end for their empire. The battle raged for 8 hours. When the orbital defenses were finally destroyed, landing ships descended to the planet's surface while the fleet engaged the remaining Zephyrian ships. Marcus watched from the bridge as tactical reports streamed in from across the planet. Landing Force Alpha has secured the primary slave compound, came the report from Colonel Williams, commanding the ground assault. Estimate 12,000 prisoners of various species, including approximately 3,000 humans. Landing Force Beta is encountering heavy resistance at the secondary compound, reported Colonel Rodriguez, the Admiral's own nephew. The Zephyrians have fortified positions throughout the facility, requesting immediate air support. The ground fighting was even more brutal than the space battle. The Zephyrians had turned many of the slave compounds into fortresses, using the prisoners as human shields while they fought from heavily defended positions. Human soldiers had to advance carefully, trying to avoid harming the very people they had come to save. But gradually, compound after compound fell to the human assault forces. The sight that greeted the liberating troops was worse than anything they had been prepared for. The conditions in the camps were horrific beyond description. Prisoners were crammed into buildings designed for half their number. Medical care was non-existent. Food and water were rationed to starvation levels. Dr. Marcus Webb, the fleet's chief medical officer, had accompanied the landing force to provide immediate care for rescued prisoners. His first report to Admiral Rodriguez was barely coherent. "Admiral, the conditions here. I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Webb transmitted from the planet's surface. "We're dealing with severe malnutrition, untreated diseases, and psychological trauma on a scale I can't adequately describe. Some of these people have been prisoners for years." As reports came in from other systems, a pattern emerged. The Zephyrians had been systematically degrading conditions in their slave facilities for months, apparently as a form of collective punishment for the Liberator raids. Prisoners who had once been valuable assets were now being treated as disposable resources. The discovery that enraged the human forces most was the processing centers. These were facilities where newly captured slaves were prepared for sale to different buyers. The preparation process involved medical examinations, psychological conditioning, and in some cases, surgical modifications to make the slaves more suitable for specific types of work. Captain Morrison, leading the assault on the processing center in the Vega system, sent a report that made Admiral Rodriguez physically sick. "Admiral, they've been performing experimental surgeries on human children trying to enhance their physical capabilities for buyers who want stronger workers. Some of these kids are barely 10 years old." The human forces fought with a fury that surprised even their enemies. Soldiers who had trained for conventional warfare found themselves in situations that demanded every ounce of their moral strength. The sight of what the Zephyrians had done to innocent people transformed disciplined military units into avenging angels. But the Zephyrians fought back with equal desperation. They knew that defeat would mean the complete destruction of their way of life. The slave trade wasn't just their economy, it was the foundation of their entire civilization. Without enslaved labor, their society would collapse within years. The turning point came during the assault on the massive slave processing complex in the Centauri system. The facility was protected by over 50 warships, and contained nearly 200,000 prisoners from dozens of species. The battle for the complex lasted 3 days and cost the human forces over 40 ships and thousands of casualties. But when the complex finally fell, the intelligence recovered from its computers revealed the true scope of the Zephyrian operation. The files contained detailed records going back over a century, showing that the slave trade had been the primary source of Zephyrian wealth and power for generations. This isn't just a criminal enterprise, Dr. Vasquez reported after analyzing the captured data. Slavery is literally the foundation of their entire economy. Every major Zephyrian corporation, every government institution, every aspect of their society depends on enslaved labor. The records also revealed something else that shocked even the hardened human commanders. The Zephyrians had been planning what they called the final harvest, a coordinated attack on over 200 human colonies designed to capture the entire populations for sale to buyers throughout the galaxy. They weren't just planning to expand their operations, Marcus realized as he read the captured plans. They were planning to systematically enslave our entire species. The discovery of the final harvest plans eliminated any remaining doubts about the necessity of Operation Broken Chains. The human forces weren't just conducting rescue operations, they were fighting for the survival of their species. As the operation continued, reports of successful liberations poured in from across the galaxy. Hundreds of slave facilities were captured or destroyed. Millions of prisoners were freed and began the long journey back to their homeworlds. But the cost was enormous. Human casualties mounted into the tens of thousands, and dozens of ships were lost in the fighting. The Zephyrians responded to each defeat with escalating brutality. When human forces liberated slave camps, they often found that the guards had executed prisoners rather than allow them to be rescued. Transport ships carrying slaves between facilities were rigged with explosives, threatening to kill everyone aboard if human ships attempted to intercept them. The most horrific incident occurred during the liberation of the slave complex on Zephyr Su. As human forces approached the facility, Zephyrian guards began systematically executing prisoners in the courtyard, broadcasting the killings to the approaching human ships. Captain Sarah Chen, leading the assault force, faced an impossible choice. If she attacked immediately, the guards might kill more prisoners. If she delayed, the executions would continue anyway, and reinforcements might arrive to strengthen the defenses. Sarah made the hardest decision of her military career. She ordered an immediate assault, accepting that some prisoners would die in order to save as many as possible. The battle was swift and brutal, but when it ended, over 30,000 beings had been liberated, though at the cost of nearly 2,000 prisoners who were killed by the guards. The psychological toll on the human forces was enormous. These were soldiers and officers who had joined the military to protect people, and they were being forced to watch helplessly as innocent beings were murdered by their enemies. Some units began to refuse to take Zephyrian prisoners, executing captured guards and officers on the spot. Admiral Rodriguez found himself facing a moral crisis. His forces were beginning to respond to Zephyrian atrocities with atrocities of their own. The desire for vengeance was threatening to transform the liberation operation into a war of extermination. "Sir, we need to address the situation with prisoner executions," Commander Park advised during one of their daily briefings. "Some of our commanders are ordering the summary execution of any Zephyrian found in a slave facility." Marcus understood the anger that was driving his forces, but he also knew that giving in to that anger would make them no better than their enemies. "Issue orders to all commanders. Zephyrian prisoners are to be taken alive when possible and turned over to military tribunals for trial. We're fighting to uphold the law, not to abandon it." But even as Marcus tried to maintain discipline among his forces, he knew that the war had fundamentally changed. What had started as a rescue operation had become something far more significant. The human species was fighting for its survival against an enemy that had built an entire civilization on the enslavement of others. The Zephyrians had broken humanity's sacred law, and they had done it on a scale that defied comprehension. Millions of beings had suffered and died to build their empire. Now that empire was crumbling under the assault of an enraged humanity, and the final reckoning was still to come. The blood price was rising with each passing day, but Admiral Rodriguez knew that there could be no peace until every chain was broken and every slave was free. The war would continue until the Zephyrian slave empire was completely destroyed, no matter what the cost in blood and treasure. Justice demanded nothing less. The final phase of Operation Broken Chains began with the siege of Zephyr Prime, the homeworld of the Zephyrian Syndicate. For 3 months, the human fleet had systematically destroyed slave facilities across dozens of star systems, liberating millions of prisoners and crippling the enemy's economic infrastructure. Now they had come to the heart of the empire that had built itself on suffering. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Righteous Fury, studying the tactical display that showed the Zephyrian homeworld and its defenses. The planet was protected by the largest concentration of military forces the Zephyrians had ever assembled. Hundreds of warships, orbital battle stations, and planetary defense systems created overlapping fields of fire that would challenge even the massive human fleet. Final count, Admiral, reported Captain Chen, 2,437 ships, including the entire Terran battle fleet and volunteer forces from 43 human colonies. This is the largest military force our species has ever assembled. Dr. Vasquez approached with the final intelligence briefing. Her analysis of captured Zephyrian data had revealed the true purpose of their final target. The orbital station designated Zephyr Station 1 isn't just a military installation, she reported. It's the central auction house for their entire slave trade network. Our estimates suggest they're holding over 500,000 prisoners there, including nearly 200,000 humans. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The station wasn't just a symbol of Zephyrian power. It was the beating heart of their slave empire. For over a century, sentient beings had been bought and sold in its vast auction chambers while Zephyrian nobles watched from luxury boxes above. "What's the station's defensive capability?" Marcus asked. "Significant," Sarah replied. "Heavy armor, powerful shields, and enough firepower to engage a battle fleet. But it's also the size of a small city. If we damage it too severely during the assault, we could kill the very people we're trying to save." The tactical problem was enormous. The station had to be captured intact to save the prisoners, but it was too well defended to be taken easily. A direct assault would result in massive casualties on both sides. A siege would give the Zephyrians time to execute prisoners or call for reinforcements. "What about the planetary government?" Marcus asked. "Any sign they're willing to negotiate?" Dr. Vasquez shook her head. Their last transmission was a formal declaration that they would rather die than surrender their economic assets to what they called human terrorists. They're calling this a war for the survival of their civilization. Marcus understood their position. The Zephyrians had built their entire society on slave labor. Without enslaved beings to work their mines, factories, and farms, their economy would collapse and their standard of living would plummet. They were fighting for their way of life, which made them even more dangerous, but they had also made a fundamental miscalculation. They assumed that humans would eventually grow tired of the war and accept a negotiated settlement that allowed some form of slavery to continue. They couldn't comprehend that humanity would sacrifice everything to ensure that not a single sentient being remained in chains. "Open a channel to all ships," Marcus ordered. "It's time to address the fleet." The communication system connected him to every ship in the human armada. On screens throughout the fleet, soldiers, sailors, and officers saw their commander preparing to speak. Many of these people had volunteered for the mission knowing they might not survive. They had left their families and homes to fight for strangers they had never met. "To all personnel of the Liberation Fleet," Marcus began, "we stand at the gates of the empire that has caused more suffering than any other force in galactic history. For over a century, the Zephyrians have built their wealth on the pain of enslaved beings. They have taken our people, our children, and turned them into property to be bought and sold." He paused, looking at the faces of his bridge crew. These were good people who had given everything to fight for what was right. Today we end their empire forever. The station before us contains 500,000 prisoners, including 200,000 of our own people. We will free every one of them, and we will ensure that no other sentient being ever suffers as they have suffered. The channel remained open as reports came in from across the fleet. Ship after ship confirmed their readiness for the final assault. Colonial militias, Terran Navy regulars, corporate security forces, and volunteer crews all united by their determination to see justice done. The battle began at dawn, Zephyr prime time. The human fleet spread out in attack formation, engaging the outer defensive perimeters while assault ships raced toward their primary targets. The space around the planet became a maze of explosions and energy beams as the largest space battle in galactic history unfolded. Marcus watched the tactical display as his ships fought their way through layer after layer of Zephyrian defenses. The enemy fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat would mean the end of everything they had built. But human determination proved stronger than Zephyrian desperation. "Breakthrough on Vector 7, reported the tactical officer. "Assault squadrons are approaching Zephyr Station 1. The massive orbital station was a city-sized structure that had served as the center of the galactic slave trade for generations. Its auction chambers could hold thousands of prisoners at once, while its detention levels contained holding areas for hundreds of thousands more. The station's computer systems contained records of every slave transaction for the past 50 years. Captain Sarah Chen led the assault on the station personally, commanding a force of specially trained Marines equipped for boarding operations. The fighting inside the station was brutal and personal. Zephyrian guards used prisoners as human shields, forcing the Marines to advance carefully through corridors filled with terrified civilians. Deck by deck, room by room, Sarah commanded over the tactical channel. "Every prisoner we save makes this worth it." The liberation of Zephyr Station 1 took 18 hours of continuous fighting. When it was over, the Marines had freed 547,000 prisoners from dozens of species. The sight that greeted them in the holding areas was beyond description. Beings who had been treated as cargo were crammed into spaces barely large enough for half their number. Many were sick, injured, or psychologically broken by their ordeal. But among the rescued prisoners were thousands of humans who had been captured years earlier. Families that had been separated during raids were reunited. Children who had grown up in slavery saw the sun for the first time in their lives. Adults who had given up hope of ever being free again wept as human soldiers cut their chains. Dr. Webb and his medical teams worked around the clock to provide care for the rescued prisoners. Many required immediate surgery or intensive care just to survive. Others needed psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of their captivity. But they were alive and they were free. The capture of Zephyr Station 1 broke the back of Zephyrian resistance. With their primary command center in human hands and their slave trade infrastructure destroyed, the remaining Zephyrian forces began to surrender or flee to neutral space. But the Zephyrian leadership made one final attempt to negotiate. A transmission from the planetary government reached the human fleet, offering to discuss terms for ending the conflict. Admiral Rodriguez received the transmission in his ready room, accompanied by Captain Chen and Dr. Vasquez. The Zephyrian official on the screen was obviously desperate, his scaled features showing fear and exhaustion. "Admiral Rodriguez," the Zephyrian began, "surely we can reach some accommodation. We are prepared to offer significant reparations for any irregularities in our labor practices. We can establish new regulations to ensure proper treatment of workers." Marcus felt disgust rise in his throat. Even now, facing total defeat, the Zephyrians couldn't bring themselves to use the word slavery. They still thought of their victims as workers, as assets, as anything except people. "You broke the only law that mattered," Marcus replied, his voice cold as space. "There will be no negotiation, no mercy, no quarter. Blood for blood." The transmission ended and Marcus gave the order for the final assault on the planet's surface. The remaining Zephyrian military forces were quickly overwhelmed by the combined human fleet. Cities surrendered without resistance as the civilian population realized that continued fighting would only bring more death. The liberation of Zephyr Prime marked the end of the Zephyrian Syndicate as a political entity. Their government collapsed, their military was destroyed, and their economy was in ruins. The survivors scattered to other systems, but they would never again have the power to enslave anyone. In the months that followed, human forces continued to hunt down the remnants of the slave trade network. Ships full of prisoners were intercepted and liberated. Hidden slave camps were discovered and destroyed. Buyers who had purchased enslaved beings were tracked down and forced to release their victims. The total count of liberated prisoners reached over 8 million beings from dozens of species. But the cost had been enormous. Nearly a quarter of the human fleet had been destroyed in the fighting. Hundreds of thousands of human soldiers, sailors, and officers had died in the war. Entire colonies had sacrificed their defense fleets to support the liberation effort. Captain Sarah Chen, now bearing the scars of dozens of battles, established the Stellar Liberation Corps as a permanent military force dedicated to preventing the rise of any new slave empire. The Corps would patrol the galaxy, ready to respond to any reports of slavery or forced labor anywhere in known space. Admiral Rodriguez retired from active duty, but remained as an advisor to the Terran government. His final act was to establish a memorial on Earth for all those who had died in the Liberation War. The names of every human who had given their life for the cause were carved into black stone, along with a simple inscription: "They died so others might live free." The war had changed humanity's place in the galaxy. Other species that had tolerated or ignored the slave trade now understood that humans would never accept such practices. The single law that governed human space had been written in the ashes of an entire civilization, and the message was clear across the stars: break humanity's law regarding slavery, and face complete destruction. The freed prisoners gradually returned to their home worlds, carrying with them stories of human sacrifice and determination. Many species that had previously viewed humans as just another ambitious race now saw them differently. They were the people who had sacrificed everything to free strangers they had never met. Dr. Elena Vasquez continued her research, but now her work focused on helping liberated prisoners recover from their trauma and rebuild their lives. She established treatment centers throughout human space, staffed by volunteers who understood that freedom was meaningless without the support to use it. Years later, as Marcus stood before the memorial wall reading the names of the fallen, he reflected on what they had accomplished. The war had been terrible and costly, but it had been necessary. The Zephyrian slave empire was gone forever, and millions of beings were free because good people had been willing to fight for what was right. The galaxy was a safer place now, but Marcus knew that vigilance would always be required. There would always be those who sought to profit from the suffering of others. There would always be those who viewed sentient beings as property to be owned and sold. But humanity had proven that such evil would never go unopposed. They had shown that some principles were worth any sacrifice, that some laws were written in blood and could never be broken without consequence. The war was over, but the watch would continue forever. As long as humans existed among the stars, no sentient being would ever again be bought, sold, or owned by another. That was humanity's promise to the galaxy, sealed with the blood of heroes who had died to make it reality. The price had been paid and justice had been served.